And we call it stress the silent killer because we have been looking into the close relationship that the mind has with the body, and that the mind communicates with our body, especially in fighting a disease. So we're going to talk about stress is silent killer, understanding the impact and strategies for coping with stress. Now, all of us, I'm sure, have experienced stress in our lives. Am I correct? Yes, all of us have experienced some form of stress. We might have experienced stress. We might have experienced stress in our homes, stress in our workplace. We might experience stress in our home, in our workplace, but we have experienced some form of stress in our lives. In fact, brothers and sisters, one report tells us that stress-related illness costs the U.S. economy hundreds of billions of dollars annually. Could you believe that? That just stress costs the economy billions of dollars annually, with recent estimates citing $280 billion to over $300 billion per year. Yes, you'd be surprised to know that a lot of people, they basically have to take time out of work because of stress, because they cannot cope in the workplace. And so this costs our economy a lot of money. We're told this figure includes the cost of health care, because some people have to go through counseling. Some people have to do other form of therapy to help them. But it says this figure includes the cost of health care, decreased productivity, absenteeism, and employee turnover. So we see, brothers and sisters, that stress really costs a lot of money. But furthermore, the toll also that it makes upon our what? Upon our minds and upon our bodies. And I'm sure, as I stated before, that all of us have experienced some form of stress in our lives. And so stress is, to many people, they live with stress. They operate in stress. I remember when I used to work in the financial institution, when I worked, I worked in an environment that was very stressful. And I had a job on Wall Street, and I worked in the front office. And it was a very stressful atmosphere I worked in. It was a very stressful atmosphere because everything that you did, you had to be very precise because you were dealing with billions of dollars. And I remember when the economy fell at one time, that one of the brokers, he got overwhelmed with stress and he committed suicide because he was responsible for so many people, he had a lot of clients, and he of course was responsible for their portfolio, for their money. So stress, brothers and sisters, can really have a terrible effect upon us, although stress sometimes is good also when we are facing certain things. So we want to define stress and its origin. We want to look at how stress is manifested in our daily lives and strategies for managing and reducing stress. Okay. So, defining stress and its origin. So, what is stress? What is stress? What is stress? Well, it's a state of mental or emotional strain or tension. And this tension is usually seen when we're going through something. We become edgy, We become anxious. We're consumed with worry. And sometimes we tend to be, it's like we're going out of our mind because we cannot help the situation that is happening to us. So it's a state of mental or emotional strain or tension resulting from adverse or very demanding circumstances. In the world that we live in, we are continually confronted with some form of stress. I'm sure some of you driving to church here this morning, it might have been a stressful experience because you wanted to make sure you were on time. And so you're doing all in your power to make sure you get here in time. Yes, stress usually is brought about by internal and external forces. So it could be something going on within us, and as well as it could be a situation that is going on maybe in the workplace, in the home, or it could be something that is going on in our lives that we have absolutely no control over. But that particular thing, it's affecting us in one way or another. Now, the types of stress. Now, you have acute and you have chronic stress. Now, acute stress is something that is usually brief, and it's usually triggered by an immediate challenge. Like you might be going through something, and this thing is only for a short period of time you're going through that. Or it could be just something that happened. It could be that you and someone got into an argument, and so that might have stressed you, as it were. And then you have chronic stress. Now, chronic stress is prolonged, and it can lead to serious health problems. Now, I just spoke to you about the people who they have to take time off from work because they just can't cope. Their body is like they're shut down. They just cannot make it from day to day. They just cannot function, as it were. So you have chronic stress, which is prolonged and can lead to serious health problems if not managed effectively over time. So if it's not managed properly or effectively over time, it can really lead to serious problems. Hopefully, none of us, experience that type of stress that it's a long time. Now, internal and external sources of stress. Internal stress arises from personal expectations sometimes, worries, self-imposed pressure that affects our well-being. So in other words, you might be under stress because you have a certain project to finish a certain time. And so instead of it being something that you gladly do, it could be that because of the pressure that is being brought upon you, it makes you stressed out. External sources of stress originate from work demands, relationships, environmental challenges, impact daily lives. Even dealing with the environment also could cause external stress for someone. Now, the percentage of individuals that are affected by stress. And we're told, according to a 2022 survey, 76% of adults reported experiencing at least one symptom of stress in the previous months, such as headache, fatigue, or feeling nervous. And these are usually symptoms when someone is stressed. They usually, symptom might be they have headache, they might have fatigue, or feel nervous. Impact on daily life. We're told around 56% of adults in the US say stress has affected their lives. Yes, because they're individuals that are living under certain conditions and are going through certain conditions, maybe in their homes or on their job or within their family, and it is stressful. So we're told that 56% of adults in the US say stress has affected their daily lives at least once in the past year. Another study found that nearly half of all US adults, 49%, say stress has negatively affected their behavior. So stress can negatively also affect one's behavior because of stress. Okay, feeling overwhelmed. Around 33% of US adults feel so stressed they can't function. So the stress that they're going through, it causes them that they just cannot function. They cannot hold down a job. They cannot do their work properly because they feel stressed out. Global perspective, though. From a global perspective, about 62% of adults say stress affects their daily lives at least once in the past year. And of course, stress in the workplace, 83% of US citizens say workers report experiencing work-related stress. So work-related stress does happen every day in the lives of people. And as we will see, brethren, that we might be going through stress, and many of us, if we don't know the angle of stress can also affect us internally, with even us getting sick, bringing on certain diseases upon us. As we saw this morning in our health nugget, where the servant of the Lord brought out to us that stress also causes, she says what? Indigestion. Okay, 3 components of stress. The experience of stress has 3 components. First is the event. So the first is the event, physical or emotional. So we might go through an event, and this event we go through might be so terrible that it's caused us to be stressed out. We can't function. It caused us to be confused. It caused us to just lock down. So first is the event, the physical or emotional that the organism interprets as stress. And I just want you to know that different individuals might be going through different experiences in their lives. But it's how one interprets what they're going through. Because some individuals might be going through a bad marriage, but they're not letting it affect them. They're their normal self. While some people might be going through a terrible marriage, and that marriage is taking an effect upon them, upon how they function. They might be crying all the time if it's a female. They might be just, don't want to communicate with anyone. They might be depressed because of what they're going through. So stress, it depends on the individuals and how we're able to deal with that threat. We're told that the second element is a process system that experience how an individual process that which is going on with them and interpret the meaning of that stressor. In the case of human beings, this process system is a nervous system, in particular the brain. So through our nervous system, comes from our brain, we are able to process that experience in human. The third constitution is that stress response, which consists of various physiological and behavioral adjustment made as a reaction to perceived threats. So we might be going through stress, and it might be having various psychological and behavioral things might start to take place in our lives. And you see that some people are going through stress, and they might be withdrawn. They might not want to talk. They might be exhibit nervous behavior, or they might just want to keep away from individual. So there's truly different components of stress and how one perceives it, or how one basically reacts to what is happening to them. Example, the loss of employment. will be perceived as a major threat. Wouldn't you say that? If you lose your job today, wouldn't it have an effect upon you? Especially if you know that you didn't have another paycheck tomorrow. You would start to think about, well, how am I going to pay my mortgage? You might start to think about, how am I going to pay my rent? Where am I going to get money to buy food with? Or you might think, how am I going to feed my children? So a loss of employment will be perceived as a major threat by the one, while the other may see it as an opportunity, especially if you know that you are financially secure, then you don't have to, it won't be a threat to you. So there is no uniform or universal relationship between a stressor and a stress response. Each stress event is singular and is experienced in the present, but it also has its resonance from the past. So stress, some people go through some kind of stress if they even see that they are repeating an experience that they have gone through or had many years ago. And that experience could come back and even define or help to define what they're going through at that very moment. Now, how can we define stress? For each of us, stress can be a matter of personal disposition and even more of personal history. There are many forces that can contribute to stress. From research done, it was discovered that the biology of stress predominantly affects 3 types of tissues or organs in the body. In the hormonal system, visible changes occur in the adrenal glands, we're told. And in the immune system, stress affects the spleen, the thymus, the lymph glands, and the intestinal lining of the digestive system. So all of these areas are areas in which stress have an effect upon and will cause certain changes or certain things to happen in our bodies. Although we of ourselves might not even recognize that what is really happening to us. Only thing we know that we are going through different changes in our lives. In result of stress in rats, we're told the rats' autopsy after stress had enlarged the adrenals and shrunk the lymph organs and ulcerated intestines. This is experienced just in rats. Now, stress also destabilization of the body homeostasis or balance in the system. Let us look at some of the external forces that cause stress. External and environmental forces that leads to stress include physical factors like noise. Have you ever associated stress with noise? Yeah, okay. Someone say with kids. But also sometimes you might hear a loud music going off, right? Like I have a friend of mine and she lives close to a gun range. In fact, behind her subdivision is a gun range. And whenever the guns start going off, she gets nervous because she don't know if a bullet might, come through her window. And so it sometimes wakes her up in the morning. You hear the guns going off. So it affects her. So we say that the external environmental forces that leads to stress include physical factors like noise, pollution, or air pollution, extreme temperature, and toxins can also affect us also. Now, these stressors, which can both naturally and human-made, trigger physiological response in the body, potentially leading to a negative, healthy outcome and impact our mental well-being. So that's the thing with these factors, brothers and sisters, that if we're going through a situation, a stressful situation with noise, it can affect us. It could make us be nervous. It could make us get very nervous from time to time. And so it can have an effect upon us as individuals. And I'm sure too, that's why inspiration recommends to God's people that they should live in a what? Peaceful environment, get away from the big cities. Because the big cities, there's a lot of what? A noise, right? And, I've met individuals who have lived in the cities for many years. And when they go out in the country, they have a problem. You know why? Because they're not used to being in a quieter environment. They're used to the bustles and sounds of the big city. I remember once I went to a camp meeting in Northern Ontario, and there was a young man that came from New Jersey to that camp meeting, and he felt out of place. Why did he feel out of place? Because he came from the city, and he's used to the noise, and he's used to seeing people, hearing loud, hearing music going. So he felt like he was out of his environment. But he had adapted himself to his environment. So noise, pollution, all these things can affect us in some way, could have an effect upon us, and because of stress. Now, these stressors, which can both be natural and human, man-made, trigger physiological response in the body, potentially leading to negative health outcomes and impact well-being. So we'd be surprised to know how just these negative stressors can lead to negative health outcomes and impact our mental well-being. Increased stress hormone like cortisol and catecholamines triggers the body's stress response. This happens because the brain perceives noise as a potential threat. Just like my friend, when she hears the guns going off, she sees it as something what? Negative. She sees it that someone might send a bullet through her window and cause harm to her. So she starts to panic, as it were. This happens because the brain perceives noise as a potential threat, activating the pituitary, adrenal axis, and sympathetic nervous system. The extent of the increase depends on factors like noise, intensity, during, and actively being disturbed. So these are some of the things that, one goes through when they hear stress. We're told stress destabilizes the body's homeostasis. How does noise pollution, air pollution affect us individually and collectively? Let us look at noise and its effect upon our overall health. Stress response triggered by unwanted or excessive noise can lead to increased stress hormones that the body releases, cardiovascular problems, mental health issues like anxiety, depression, physical effects such as hearing loss, sleep disturbance. This stress response is mediated by the activation of the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal, the HPA axis, leading to potential chronic health issues. To cope, one can use noise canceling technique. That's what some people have to do. Chronic noise exposure can lead to cardiovascular disease, such as heart disease, by triggering the body's stress response, which increase blood pressure. So just through stress, it can increase your blood pressure and heart rate by causing sleep disruption. These effects contribute to risk factors like hypertension, high cholesterol, endothelin or dysfunction, which one time can increase the risk of conditions like coronary artery disease, strokes, and heart failure. So stress can really do a lot to us, brothers and sisters, and many of us who still resides in the city, we go through a lot of stress, and we don't even recognize it, and we don't even recognize what it's doing to our bodies. That's the sad truth about the whole thing, that we don't recognize what it's doing to our body as we perceive that stress, or we go through that stress. It does a lot to different the different organs in our body. Now, so understanding PTSD. Does anyone know what PTSD is? It is when someone has actually experienced something traumatic in their life, like a tragedy or a killing or something. It has a psychological and mental effect upon them. And we see that a lot of soldiers or vets who went to war, this is one of the main illnesses that they have. And so they live with a lot of stress. But the one I really want to look a little more into this evening is the psychosomatic disorder. Now, psychosomatic refers to the interaction between psychological factors such as stress, anxiety, and depression, and physical health. Because a lot of individuals do not recognize that if you're going through certain, if you're going through stress, anxiety, and depression, that these things can also have an effect upon the organs of your body, that they also can cause you to get sick also. And you might find yourself experiencing certain illness. And you might say, well, I eat right. And you might say, that I do, certain things, but you don't really recognize what is real, that it's also having, that your surrounding or your environment or what you're going through is also having an effect upon you. Now, when some people go through stress, brethren, just as an example, some people, rashes might come on they might break out in a rash on their body. Some people, their hair might fall out when they're going through, severe stress. Some individuals, they might gain weight because they use food as a comfort to help them to go through the stressor or to go through the stress that they're experiencing, while some people might not eat, and so you find that they're losing weight. So stress can truly have an effect upon us, and we might not even recognize it. You might say, oh, I'm losing weight or I'm gaining weight. But it might be something deeper that is going on with you that is actually bringing on that condition in your life. And so that's why we have to recognize, brothers and sisters, that the mind and the body is closely related to each other. In fact, Inspiration tells us in volume 5, page 444, she tells us that sickness of the mind prevails everywhere. And we know that there are a lot of people walking around the streets and maybe even coming to church every Sabbath too, that have sickness of the mind. I hate to say that. But she says sickness of the mind prevails everywhere. 9/10 of the diseases from which men suffer have their foundation here. So where does most of the diseases that we have come from? Inspiration tells us. The mind. She said 90% of the disease that we suffer begins where? In the mind. 90%. She said 9/10 of the diseases from which we suffer have their foundation here. Their foundation meaning their what? Their beginning in the mind. I remember hearing a case of someone who said that they have cancer, and they'd go to the doctor, and they wouldn't be diagnosed with cancer, but they kept on saying it and kept on believing it. So you know what happened? They eventually develop cancer. So we don't recognize how powerful our our minds are. We don't recognize just how powerful our minds are, brothers and sisters. So inspirations tell us that sickness of the mind prevail everywhere, and 90% of the diseases from which men suffer have their foundation here. In fact, they begin in their minds. Perhaps some living home trouble is like a canker, she tells us, eating to the very soul and weakening the life forces. So you might be, going through something in your home, and yet you come, to church, or you go to work every day, you're looking good, but internally, it's doing a job in your body, and it's causing you to become even sick without you even knowing it. In Counsels on Health, page 28, the servant of the Lord brings that same truth out to us again. She says, the relationship which exists between the mind and the body is very intimate. So she said the relationship which exists between the mind and the body is what? Intimate. It means closely related. They have a close relationship, but still, many of us don't recognize that. Many of us don't recognize just how much the relationship our minds have with our body. And that's why it is important, brothers and sisters, that we take care of our minds. As the Bible says, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things have a good report. Because a negative report can what? Can also affect us. Somebody give you a negative report, and next thing you know, your blood pressure is what? High. They give you a negative report, and you find yourself landing what? In the emergency room, because you just cannot stand what you're hearing. You can't just deal with what you're hearing. So inspiration is telling us that the relationship which exists between the mind and the body is very intimate. When one is affected, the other what? The other sympathizes. So if one is affected, then it sympathizes with the other. It sympathizes with the other. And so even in diseases, if something in the mind goes wrong, or we receive something from the mind wrong, then it affects us. She says, when one is affected, the other sympathizes. The condition of the mind affects the health of the physical system. She says the condition of the mind affects the what? The health of the what? The physical symptoms. So we might just be looking at I got to, get my blood pressure checked. I got to go, check my heart. I got to go check my kidneys. But it could be that we need to stop and really think about what's going on up here. She said, and then she gave us a good example in this quote. She told us that remorse for sin sometimes undermines the constitution and unbalances the mind. So we might have done something terrible, and just we're going through that remorse state in our minds, and we'd be surprised to know how much that remorse state that we're going through begins to affect us and begin to affect even the organs of our bodies. But she said there are even erroneous doctrines also, as that of eternal burning hell. And she's just giving us examples. And the endless torment of the wicked. Because some people believe that, they're going to burn forever, as we know. And that by giving exaggerated and distorted views of the character of God have produced the same result upon sensitive minds. So just by that, it could induce results upon sensitive minds. Infidels have made the most of these unfortunate cases attributes insanity to religion. You know, there's some people who attribute insanity to what? To religion. You know, to religion because of the negative effect they see it has had on some individuals that are religious, that claims to be religious. But she says this is a gross libel, and one which they will not be pleased to meet by and by. And she says the religion of Christ, so far from being the cause of insanity, is one of its most effective remedies. Amen. For it is a potent soother of the nerves, inspiration tells us. Now, example of health condition that are related to psychosomatic disorder. And we say that psychosomatic disorders are mental disorders that affects the organs of the body. She says emotional distress, as I mentioned before, can lead to skin conditions like eczema, depression related to fatigue, stress-induced headaches, anxiety related to what? Stomach what? Ulcers. So all these things, brother and sister, is going on up here, but it's what? Affecting the organs of our body. And as mentioned before, stress also leads to hypertension, which is high blood pressure. You may know someone that is experiencing a very stressful situation in their life. And this situation has caused their blood pressure to go up considerably, which can also lead to one having a stroke or other health-related conditions such as kidney disease and other life-threatening illnesses. So we know for one that, and as we gave the example of somebody getting bad news, that it can affect them in a negative way. Now, not only does stress affects our bodies and organ, but it also affects our immune system. What does our immune system do? It fights what? This helps to fight off, wear off diseases, right? When we are stressed, it can also have a direct effect upon our immune systems. You know, we might think that our immune system is just weak, while we're getting a lot of colds, we're getting the flu. But it could be it's because we're going through a stressful situation in our lives, and it's affecting our immune system. As most of you know, our immune system helps us to fight off disease. Okay, how about the respiratory system also? Well, stress also can affect our respiratory system, especially if we have certain diseases that is connected with the respiratory system. It says here that the respiratory system supplies oxygen to cells and remove carbon dioxide waste from the body. Here comes in through the nose, and it goes out through the larynx in the throat, and down through the trachea and into the lungs through the bronchi. The bronchioles that transfer oxygen to red blood cells for circulation. Stress and strong emotions can present with respiratory symptoms such as shortness of breath, rapid breathing, as the airway between the nose and the lungs constrict. For people without respiratory disease, this is generally not a problem, as the body can manage the additional work to breathe comfortable. But psychologically, stress can exacerbate breathing problems for people with pre-existing respiratory diseases such as asthma, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, including emphysema and chronic bronchitis. So it's telling us that stress can affect these conditions. Some studies show that acute stress such as death of a loved one, can actually trigger asthma attack. In addition, the rapid breathing or hyperventilation caused by stress can bring on a panic attack, or you can't breathe, in someone prone to panic attack. So stress can truly do a lot of things to our bodies, but it's just that we just don't, recognize it. And you think about it, brothers and sisters, we're talking about stress, and we're talking about the mind. It relates to different systems of our body when it comes to stress. But here it is, we are soon to face a time of trouble. And if we can't deal with stress, how are we going to make it through the time of trouble? I mean, we have to just, think about that. You know what I'm saying? Because some people, any little thing happens and they get so excited. It's like the end of the world for them. And so they have not learned to manage stress. And the only way we could manage stress, brothers and sisters, is with the help of Christ. Amen? Because the Lord promised to keep us in what kind of peace? Perfect peace. Perfect peace. The Lord promised to keep us in perfect peace. And Christ says if we abide in him, he will what? He will abide with us. So we have to learn to, as it were, rest in Christ, abide in Christ, and really believe with all our hearts that Christ can keep us. Because if his perfect peace is in us, then whatever comes our way, we will be able to deal with it. We won't become nervous. We won't act like we're out of control. But some individuals, every little thing happens, they fly off the handle. Do you know someone like that? You have to angle them with kid gloves, as it were. Because if you say the wrong word to them, or the wrong thing to them, I should say, they will fly off the angle. But this should not be the way God's people should not have these kind of characteristics, brothers and sisters. We need to make sure that we are abiding in Christ. Because as we learn to deal with different circumstances in our lives from day to day, then when the big trials, the big tests come to us, we'll be able to deal with them even better. Amen? And it's nothing that, say, we of ourselves are doing, but it is the peace that Christ has given us that will truly help us to be overcomers, will truly help us to really and truly overcome stressful situation in our lives, brothers and sisters. And even now, brothers and sisters, we can also do certain things to help us to manage stress. Walking helps us to keep stress under control. Exercising. If you exercise, it will help you to get rid of some of the stress, especially if you go out in nature and you're breathing the fresh air. All these things help, brothers and sisters. Also, a good massage. Have any of you ever taken a good massage? You might be so stressed out, but you take a good massage and it helps to increase your what? Your circulation. And you feel like you've gone through a life-changing experience. So there are things that we can do, brothers and sisters, in helping us to overcome stress. Simple things that we can do. And that's what the Lord is calling us back to. He's calling us back to the simple things, the simple natural remedies that we need to follow and we need to be promoting among ourselves and among the people in the world. So physical activity benefits. Engage in regular exercise, boost physical strength, enhance the body's ability to manage stress effectively, and balance nutrition too. Eating a well-rounded diet supports overall health by providing essential nutrients and energy to the body. Adequate sleep. Now, if you don't get adequate sleep, you're going to be what? Tired. You're going to be stressed out. You're going to be nervous. So getting adequate sleep is important also. Some people might say, well, I only get 4 hours of sleep. I go to bed really late and I wake up early in the morning. You're killing yourself. You're killing yourself. You're killing yourself slowly. And you're wearing down your life forces also. So you're actually committing suicide slowly. So we really need to take our health in hands, and we really need to strive to follow God, program, God's simple remedies, nutrition, exercise, drinking water, sunlight, temperance, rest, fresh air, and trust in divine power. That's the only way we'll really be able to make it, brothers and sisters. God has given us a health message, and it's not a disjointed health message. All these 8 laws He has given us, they all work together to promote our overall well-being. And we as God's people should take advantage of the things that God has given to us. So many people in the world wish they knew these things. But here it is, God has blessed His people with this knowledge. And so we need to be changers in society. In other words, we need to go into society and we need to actually promote God health laws and show men and women how they can overcome a lot of their illnesses through following God's health plan. Adequate sleep is also, as I stated before, is also very important. And also sometimes, when we're going through a stressful situation, we have to seek out godly professional counselors. And I say godly professional, I know it's not on the screen, but I'm saying godly professional counselors to help us. People who have a relationship with God and who can help us. It says, professional counsel benefits. Counselors offer expert guidance to help individuals manage stress effectively and develop coping strategies. Support groups also. There are some people, they go to support groups to help them they go to these support groups to get support in overcoming stress, and in these support groups, individuals share their different experiences of how they're dealing with stress. And also they give different techniques that individuals could learn in overcoming stress in their life. So support groups provide a community where people share experience and receive emotional support for stress management. And even today in the workplace, because stress has become such a problem in the workplace, especially when it comes to absenteeism and overwork, that even companies today offer stress support group to their employees just to help them to cope and just to help them to get through this stressful situations they might be dealing with. But what I want to say most of all, brethren, that the person, and I'm going to bring you right back to Christ, if we cast all our cares upon Him, He says we should cast all our cares upon Him because He cares for what? He cares for us. So we should cast all the anxiety, all the worries, all the depression upon him. And he will certainly help us. And he will give us the victory in fighting or overcoming stress in our lives. And remember, most of all, brothers and sisters, that we as the people of God, we must overcome. Because when we read through great controversy, we read where the people of God went through very trying circumstances as they were going through the time of trouble. And so it is important. Again, I cannot stress it. It is important that we learn to deal with stress, that we learn to trust God. Because dealing with stress is truly learning to trust God. Because sometimes we're going to be faced with situations that look grim. But if we truly believe that God is in control of our lives and that God is there with us, then I am sure that we will come off more than victorious if we put our trust in him. Remember, he promises never to leave us and never to what? Never to forsake us. So when stressful things come, we just need to turn to Christ and we just need to ask him to help us. And I'm sure he will help us. So I hope this evening that we have gained some insights into stress, about stress, and especially how we can manage stress. And one thing I can say too, which I should have said, is being positive also will certainly help us to, as we go through stress, being positive. So at this time, I will just, if anybody want to make any comments, anything they heard.